I would trust a Muslim with my life before any Christian of any race. And you want to know why? Muslims didn't put my ancestors in chains and drag them from Africa across the Atlantic.
Bro, what are you talking about? Muslims enslaved more people than Christians. Like, do you not understand how long of a time that Muslim-led empires and systems were enslaving Africans for? Muslim empires were enslaving Africans in the 7th century. They had trade routes that ran across the Trans-Saharan, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean, and they continued this into the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. They did it for 1,300 years. The mainstream estimate among historians is between 10 and 17 million Africans that were enslaved in Muslim-controlled slave trades. Many scholars actually argue that that number is conservative because record keeping was very sparse at the time. It was very decentralized. Now, if you compare that to the European Atlantic slave trade, it lasted about 350 years, from 1500 to 1867, and there were about 12 to 12.5 million Africans who were transported, with less than 11 million that actually survived the Middle Passage. So what are you talking about? That Muslims didn't enslave your people? They did. And they did so more than anyone ever. The reason why you don't see large descendant populations across much of the Muslim world is because they castrated the Africans. The Muslims were very strict in their approach and their idea of not letting the Africans reproduce. The historical estimates put the castration mortality rates between 30 and 80%, dude. That means at minimum, when castrated, 3 men died, and at most 8, and the men who survived could not reproduce. So they enslaved your people more than anybody, and then they cut their genitals off. That way they couldn't reproduce. And they took your women as domestic servants or concubines. They made them sex slaves. And you know what they did to the children of the African women? Well, they took them into their own households, they reclassified them socially, and then they stripped them of their African lineage. There was no self-reproducing slave caste that was allowed to form under the Muslim empires and under Muslim slave trade. They didn't want Africans growing in number. That's why there's an absence of visible descendants of Africans among the Muslim world, because the Arab and Muslim system was biologically and culturally eliminative. They literally did not want you guys to exist. Oh, and by the way, your people, the Africans, were enslaving and selling each other long before the Europeans ever arrived. When Muslim traders arrived, the African kings, the elites, and merchants supplied the captives. They helped. Your African brothers and sisters helped sell each other. You're not going to trust them with your life either? When the Europeans arrived later, the same supply networks were used. Your African brothers and sisters were doing everything they could to sell their own people. So I don't know where you got your history, bro. Probably from TikTok, but you don't get to rewrite history to make one group look clean while you blame all of your problems on other people, while you also ignore the fact that your own people were enslaving and selling each other long before anybody else ever even arrived.